Hello and welcome to another edition of the Moving Iron Podcast. This podcast is proudly provided by Axon, helping dealers move more iron for almost 100 years. Find out more at axontire.com. Axon was started almost 100 years ago out of a passion for keeping agriculture moving. It's that same passion that drives them today. With a vision for a better experience for both farmer and dealer, they set out to create a better way to move more iron. When you partner with Axon, you get immediate access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. Axon carries all major brands and sizes of tires, wheels, and tracks. From custom colors and sizes to fully customized wheels, you can have the solution for virtually any problem today's farmer is trying to solve. To find more or become an Axon dealer, please visit axontire.com.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here. Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast number 136. 236. This edition of the Moving Iron Podcast is brought to you by Axon Tire, helping people move more iron for the last 100 years. For more information, go to axontire.com. Also, if you're looking for a great place to help your salespeople sell more stuff and do deals faster, check out Arrow at heyarrow.com. This week, my guest is a longtime podcast guest here, Tanner Ehmke. Tanner is with CoBank, and Tanner is a fellow Kansas. So anytime I get to talk to somebody from Kansas, it's just two smart people talking at that point. You know what I mean? So it's good to have somebody from Kansas on here. How you doing, buddy?
Good. It's great to be back, Casey.
Yeah, it's good to see you, man. Well, Tanner, there's a million things going on. For those of you that don't know who Tanner is. Tanner, why don't you just give a quick little rundown of what you do at CoBank?
Sure. I'm an economist in CoBank's research department that we call Knowledge Exchange. I focus on dairy and specialty crops, and been here since 2015. And before that, I was in Kansas. I was farming my family seed company. Before that, I was a commodities analyst in Chicago. So I've had my around the block. I've walked around the block a few times on commodity markets from all aspects of it, from the Chicago Board of Trade, being in farming and grain markets, to now as an economist at CoBank. So
Tanner's been on here a lot. He's got a lot of great economy-driven information, and we'll talk about that a little bit here. But there's a million things going on right now, Tanner. You take a look at whether we're talking about shortages across the board, whether you're talking about seed, fertilizer, machinery, the list goes on and on and on of what that might look like.
Yeah. As
you take a look at that from a 50,000 foot view, going into 22, there's not really much on the horizon that shows anything's going to be any different. So what do you think the overall impact of that's going to be to the farm economy as a whole?
Well, the impact obviously is going to be rising costs. That's been talked about at length, and I think, everything's kind of got its own story. You obviously know machinery quite well. I mean, you've got a lot of things there going on with semiconductors and a big spike in demand for new machinery because of high commodity prices. Well, we don't have that machinery there, and we have high demand for it, and that's impacting machinery prices and used machinery prices. Or with fertilizer, we just came out with a report this week by Ken Zuckerberg. Ken's our grain and farm supply economist here at CoBank. Ken's pretty concerned about what's going to happen next spring with fertilizer availability. Typically, the farm supply co-ops are going to be carrying a fair amount of product into the new year. And that inventory is not in the warehouse as you would normally expect, and so they're expecting a lot higher fertilizer prices heading in the next spring, and there's going to be that expectation that farmers are going to be cutting back on their fertility programs because of that. If not for cost, also for lack of availability too. So you've got the knock-on effects of that, perhaps with yields and things like that later on next harvest. but we'll see. We got a long ways to go between now and then. And then you've got labor shortages across the board at agriculture. That's always been a problem, especially in dairy and specialty crops that I cover, that are very manual labor intensive. And that's something that we're going to see playing out through most of 2022. The thing on labor is that that's not, quote unquote, transitory, like the Fed has been talking about, because we've had 6 million workers leave the economy for all their own different reasons. I mean, you had people taking early retirements. You had people wanting to start their own companies. You have people of fragile health that are immunocompromised and they don't want to get COVID at the office or at work. And so they've left the workforce, or perhaps they're caring for children or other family members that are of fragile health. So all these people have left the workforce, and perhaps some of them might be coming back. But I would expect that most of them are gone permanently. They're not coming back. If they do, it's going to be over a very long period. And so you've got this crush of this dearth of workers in the workforce. And when you're in agriculture and you're heavily dependent on labor, that's a big problem. Whether you're talking about production agriculture, with farming, with field operations of planting and harvesting, or other field operations, then you have processing. You got to convert all these raw materials into a processed good for consumers. And when you don't have the people there to do it, that causes that kink in the supply chain throughout all of agriculture. And then you've got the truck drivers, to move all those products from rural America to urban America. And nationwide, I think we're short about 80,000 workers, is what I've heard from the last estimate. 80,000 drivers. And pre-pandemic, we were short maybe about 70,000. So the problem has only increased with that shortage of long-haul drivers. Locally, that is a real problem in rural communities where you already have low populations and an aging workforce. And if you have just a couple of people decide to take an early retirement, you lose a couple of truck drivers in a small community. That can have some big effects. So then at the same time, it's that competition for scarce workers or scarce drivers. Let's say, for instance, I know back in my home area of Western Kansas, one of our biggest competitors for drivers was the oil industry, oil and gas. When these oil rigs start drilling more wells and they start putting up more rigs, they need truck drivers to move all that oil. Well, there's only so many people in a small community who are available to drive those trucks. And the oil companies typically are almost consistently more able to pay more for that truck driver compared to what the farmer can pay. And so with oil prices as they are, that's going to create even more stress on the local agricultural infrastructure. So these aren't things that are going to get resolved soon. In fact, I think that the pandemic has highlighted what has been an ongoing problem in agriculture, and that is the shortage of workers in local economies that are experiencing a declining and aging workforce. And that's especially true in animal agriculture, like dairy and ranching, and specialty crops, where you've got hand pickers out there, or hand harvesters, or a lot of people out there planting and harvesting by hand. So I think these are things that highlight perhaps some policy issues. Perhaps we need to be increasing immigration. That's always a sticky situation. I know the H-2A program has been the savior for a lot of people in production ag. We've been bringing more and more workers in from countries like South Africa. Well, guess what? We got a problem now with Omicron in South Africa. So it's just kind of like this one thing after another. And I don't want to be doomsday about the ag economy. I mean, commodity prices are high. Farmers and ranchers and processors are going to find a way to make the most of the situation. But we're going to ultimately, long term, Casey, this comes down to investment in technology. For instance, in dairy, what I cover, that's going to be more focus on robotic milkers. It's going to be more focused on automation in parlors, using cameras and things like that to track cows. Those kind of things start to make a lot more sense when you can't find the workers there to manage the herd. And when, let's say, for instance, you were paying $15 to $20 an hour, now you're paying $20 to $25 an hour. Well, guess what? The math changes on that technology. It starts to make financial sense, where perhaps it didn't used to make financial sense earlier. So that's what's going to happen now in this wage inflation environment, is that technology is going to cash flow a lot faster because the alternative of manual labor is so much more expensive. So I think a year like this past year and next year especially is going to drive a lot of operations across the agricultural supply chain into more mechanization and automation. And that's where we go with this.
Yeah, I agree. I talk about that a lot from the equipment standpoint, just because of what you just talked about. I mean, I don't know. I've been in the farm equipment business for 15 years now, and I don't know that there's been 15 years of conversations about the shortage of help and what that looks like. So I think that that autonomous kind of standpoint isn't going to come out of, man, it sure is cool to have one, which that'll be kind of part of it, but it's going to be more overwhelmingly, now I only need to have one combine driver to cover, 3 grain cart tractors, because they're all themselves around type of thing.
Yeah, you're forced into the situation. Yeah, right. Prior to that, you're thinking this would be cool technology to have one day. Now the discussion is, boy, what else am I going to do? I have to do this.
Right.
If I'm gonna maintain operations or grow our operation, we the only way you're going to be able to do that is deployment of technology so your workforce can do more.
Yep.
And that also requires perhaps more training. That's one conversation that gets left out, is when you climb the technology chain, you got to have employees who know how to use the technology.
Yeah.
So that can't get left out of the conversation. And those type of skilled workers are going to cost more too. They're not going to necessarily be your unskilled worker. Now they're going to be skilled workers who require training and are going to require higher pay. So the economy starts to evolve a lot faster from being unskilled to more skilled. You got to have people who are willing to live and work in rural America and do these kind of jobs, but are also skilled and trained and know how to be up to date on the latest technologies. And as we know with tech, it's going to change. You may buy up the tech chain today, and you may be on the leading edge of technology for now, but pretty soon that technology evolves pretty quick.
Right.
And you got to stay on top of it, which means now you got to change your viewpoint of labor. You're no longer hiring commodity labor, people that are unskilled. You've got to find a way to retain your skilled workers and keep them up to date on their skills and their knowledge of technology. I mean, this forces a change across the entire landscape of agriculture.
Yeah. That's kind of the $64,000 question, like when and where and how. And I've had the conversation a few times that, like just what you just said, if you're staying on top of technology and you're at, Gen 4 technology or whatever it might be, sprayer technology or whatever it is, and the guy coming into that's just now getting to Gen 1, your efficiency is, exponentially greater at, the Gen 4 level, whatever it is, at the Gen. If Gen 1 is, 50% better, I mean, Gen 4 is going to be, 90% better of his 50%. You know what I mean? So it's that huge leap. And I think it's going to that technology is going to drive, winners and losers more than I think it ever has before. Because as you look at now, most technology, farm technology, agricultural technology is openly available to about anybody, whether it's seed technology, chemical technology, fertilizer, machines, whatever it is. It's pretty well across the board. It's pretty well available to anyone. Sooner or later, that expense of that technology and the people that you have to hire to man that technology is going to start separating out, even the most profitable folks are going to start getting kind of left behind if they don't stay up on what's this technology look like. And in any industry, whether it's, especially on the specialty crop side, I don't know how many videos I've watched of autonomous, nut tree sprayers and, those kind of things where you said, it's some of that high labor intensive areas where they're short labor. They're starting to kind of look at more of this drone technology to really accomplish a lot of those tasks.
Yeah. And that's always been the case, really. I mean, when you're in a labor intensive industry like ag, technology is always going to be it'd be a disruptor. I mean, go back how many generations? Not that long ago, we still had farms that were using mules and horse-drawn plows. I mean, that's really, honestly, Casey, like our grandparents probably grew up with that technology. And if you didn't mechanize quickly, your farm was taken over by somebody who did get that technology.
Right.
And that's no different than today.
Yep.
Not at all. I mean, it's more so today than anything else, except now we're getting into these technologies that are so far beyond a lot of us what we can even comprehend. We're starting getting into data management and AI, and I mean just levels of sophistication on technology that is mind blowing. And it's not slowing down; it's only getting faster.
Right, absolutely. So I could talk about this for hours, but we want to let's jump over and talk about inflation for a little bit. So inflation is a big deal.
Yeah,
came out, and Janet Yellen came out earlier this week. Talked a lot about we need to retire the word transitory, and tapering is going to start happening at a more rapid pace, and probably going to look at sometime March, April, June timeframe at raising some rates. Let's start looking at raising some rates and what that might look like and how that's going to affect the overall economy. So, as an economist, as you're looking at inflation, right? Obviously, inflation is a big deal. It just make everything more expensive and so on and so forth. But as you take a look at all the government programs that we have out there, the Fed's going to print more money and could possibly make the inflation worse than what it is right now. And then you start talking about tapering and raising rates. There's a lot of stuff in that pot that don't necessarily mix. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the Fed is still printing money. And even when, Chairman Powell says we're going to accelerate our tapering process faster than we had anticipated, they're still printing a lot of money. Right now, in their November meeting, they talked about reducing their bond purchases by $15 billion a month. And right now, really coming into this, they were buying $120 billion per month. So if you do the math, you walk that back, a $15 billion reduction per month. That puts you at June when they would be ready to start raising rates. So he indicated in his last testimony, we're a little scared about this inflation thing. This is serious. We're going to do it faster than that. Well, between now and then, all they're doing is taking their foot off the gas a little bit faster. They haven't started raising rates yet. And so we're still in a loose monetary policy. Rates are historically still quite low. And even when they start raising rates, the question is, how far and how fast can they really do it? Can Chairman Powell do like Paul Volcker did back in the 70s and early 80s? I mean, that was phenomenal. He took rates all the way up to 20%.
Right.
So the question is, what is capable, or what is Chairman Powell capable of doing? Although he said he's going to accelerate the tapering and he'd be open to raising rates a lot faster or sooner rather than he had indicated prior, the question is, what is the capacity of rate increases? What can the economy handle with the trillions and trillions of dollars of debt out there?
Right.
And so I think that we are in unknown territory here because of that. And I think that that's the big unknown is what can the economy handle without going into recession?
Right.
Can the economy handle a rate of 2 or 3 rate hikes next year without going into recession? We don't really know because we've never had an economy like this before that has so much debt, not just in the United States but around the world. So I think that's what everyone's looking at is what is he? He can indicate that he's going to be more hawkish and start tapering faster, but the question is how far and how fast can he go before the bubble pops? I don't have any insights on that. Otherwise, I'd own my own island, my own yacht. But I think that's the big unknown. But I think that underlying a lot of this, is this. It goes back to labor, and that is not transitory. You had 6 million people leave the economy. You got wage inflation that's not going to go away even after we get through this period of you had all these consumers shopping online and all these log jams at the ports. Well, we're going to move past this. Once we get past through the holidays, a lot of this log jam problem that is driving inflation is going to go away, and transportation rates are coming down some, but we're still left with the labor problem. How many workers are going to come back? Well, a lot of them probably aren't, and so that is not going to go away anytime soon, and that's going to drive inflation. I think that's what's got him concerned. So I think what that means for agriculture then here is 2 things. Number one, in a higher rate environment, excuse me, that's what that directly means is that loans for farm operating loans are going to go up on interest rates, and so interest expense for farmers and ranchers and everyone else in agriculture is going to go up a little bit. The other issue is that what a more hawkish monetary policy means in respect to the value of the U.S. dollar, and as the monetary policy tightens, that's bullish on the dollar. And if you look at the impact of the dollar here recently, it's been quite volatile. It's gone up a lot, and what that means for agriculture is that our exports become more expensive. And that would be a headwind to our export program. And historically speaking, a strong dollar is negative on agricultural commodities. Now, it's not across the board where you're going to have that effect. And I talked about this at a conference here this week at the Farm Journal Milk Conference. And, some of this may be some of our markets may be impacted more than others. Some may be immune to it. Like, say, for instance, our dairy exports could be impacted over to Asia, but at the same time, we've got a retraction of the global dairy herd, especially over in New Zealand and Europe. And we've got historically high milk prices over in China and much of Asia. Well, even with a strong dollar, the U.S. now is kind of like one of the only places you can go now if you're going to see declining milk production in New Zealand and the EU. So I use that as an example that there's a lot of nuance here. It's hard to say that a stronger or a tighter monetary policy is going to be negative for agriculture. There are going to be some aspects of agriculture that may be immune to it. You don't know, but I don't know. There's a lot that goes into those decisions at the Fed, and Omicron, however you want to say it, could change some of that. The jobs report that just came out today indicated that hiring slowed down quite a bit, that companies are concerned about Omicron becoming a drag on the economy and impacting business. And so that may very well turn into something that could affect the Fed's decision on how fast or how soon they want to raise rates. So a lot of things up in the air there, Casey. But all we know is that the Fed is concerned about inflation now. The word transitory is probably not going to be as much in their vocabulary as it used to be. That much we know. We'll find out about Omicron over the next several weeks.
Yep. All right. So in the bill that's got passed, the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill, which I don't know if has it been passed yet?
No, I don't think so.
I think it's been passed yet, but I think it's getting close. Anyway, there is some agricultural things that are involved in those bills, both one of which you mentioned beforehand, which, since your focus is primarily dairy, the government is going to buy 16 million pounds of cheese.
Yeah, a fair amount of cheese they're going to buy, and that's been bullish on cheese markets. But again, once you get into the nuance, we got a lot of cheese in this country, so it's probably not going to have the effect that the food box program, if you remember that, in the depths of the pandemic in 2020, the government was buying huge amounts of cheese that caused extreme volatility that we've never seen before in cheese markets, and that directly impacted the volatility in milk prices. And that's probably not going to be happening this time because we've got so much cheese sitting in cold storage. So whatever they buy is that's supportive of the markets. But when you've got a surplus of inventory out there, it's going to have a limited effect on prices. So there is some positive things there. I would stress that the package, this infrastructure package, is going to be spread out over a period of years, and the bulk of the spending doesn't happen until 2024. So we've got a lot. There's a lot of things that can happen between now and then, and the economy may be in a recession by then. And we may need this extra spending from the government to help get us through it. So I hate to. I'm hesitant to start, weighing in on, the impacts of what that would be. But in the big picture, though, infrastructure is a good thing to be going into debt. If you're going to be going into debt on anything, it's infrastructure, because that's going to have longer term payouts on the economy in your productivity. So I typically don't see debt as a good thing, but if the government's going to be going into debt, infrastructure is a good thing to be doing that on. You want to invest for the future.
Agreed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some shortage. You kind of hit it on a little bit with milk, and talking about New Zealand and the EU kind of having some fallback there on a little bit of what they have as far as milk production goes. When you look at overall ending stocks for corn, wheat, rice, soybeans, I mean, we don't necessarily have a bunch of that stuff laying around. Seems to be a fairly decent crop out there. It's kind of spotty depending on where you're at and what that looks like, but for the most part, there is some room for some surplus there. I guess as you take a look at the overall commodity market as a whole and just overall stocks that are out there, what are your thoughts there? And with some of the situations that we see right now in South America with some Brazilian dryness going on, those kind of things, there is some stress out there. You got the situation in Russia with Ukraine, and what does that look like? Those are two of the biggest wheat producing countries in the world. And, if there were something to happen there, I mean, there's a big disruption there. So there's not like a lot of leeway in a lot of these markets to where if there is some kind of a disruption, whether it's a weather event or some kind of a supply chain disruption, even more than what we've got now, you can see some prices really take off and run. So I guess as you take a look at the whole macro here, what's your thought about that?
Well, right now the situation looks like that feed costs or grain and forage costs are going to be moderating in 2022. So for any end user, whether you're feeding dairy cows or pigs, chickens, or beef cattle, or running it through an ethanol plant, that situation looks to be improving on cost with those grain prices moderating. We still need to get more information on what's going to happen in South America, because it's a La Nina year, and that's typically dry. It is dry, as you pointed out, in southern Brazil and parts of Argentina. We got to get through this growing season before we understand what that production looks like. But I think the cost inflation on feed is the positive story here for end users, and that's that's been a needed reprieve from this inflation environment that we've been seeing. Feed costs just went phenomenally high this past year. And we've also had drought out in the western part of the U.S., impacting hay and corn and silage production, especially out in places like California and the Southwest. And so the improved crop scenario that we're seeing this year with stocks elevated, that's huge. We need that. I think the big story here is what's going to happen in South America. You also mentioned what's going on in the FSU, former Soviet Union, and that's a big reason as to why we have such high wheat prices, and they are restricting exports out of that part of the world. That's going to be, that's hard to. That's the geopolitical situation that you're referring to there, Casey, is hard to gather. I think you're referring to Putin and his desire to acquire part of Ukraine. Is that right? I don't have any opinions on that other than it would probably be disruptive somehow. I would assume that there would be, on a very large, a very macro viewpoint, some sort of penalty on Russia if they were to do that, and people, countries would say, we're not taking your wheat as a consequence, and that may shift purchases over to other parts of their exporters like the EU or the US. But that's a whole other issue. I think that on the feed situation, though, that's been the positive right now, and if you look at the futures curve, it's definitely moderated. We just have to see what happens in South America. Longer term, we've also got a situation with this renewable diesel, and also part of this this package, this Build Back Better, is the jet fuel, renewable jet fuel subsidy or credit. Boy, I tell you what, I've talked to some economists about that, and they anticipate that in order to fulfill the demand, we're going to need about 28 million more acres of soybeans. That's not coming from the U.S. We're tapped out. It's going to come from South America. So in the longer term, that's going to be driving a lot more demand for oil seeds, and that's the driver there is going to be soybean oil. The positive here is that soybean meal or canola meal, whatever whatever grain they're going to be using, would be in surplus domestically, and we'd sacrifice our soybean export program in that scenario. So domestic supplies of soybean meal would be a positive. Not necessarily a bad thing for end users if you are a buyer of soybean meal, but that's in that longer term viewpoint. If we were to fulfill that demand, that would be a positive for domestic end users.
Yep. Yeah, it's a lot of moving parts there. You look at like you talked about the feed side of it. Cattle prices have been they're kind of at a seasonal low, but they've had some rebound here, and they've been looking like that. And I think a lot of that has to do with what we're seeing with feed prices. The price of corn and wheat, wheat crops have come down. So definitely move there. I think probably the last thing I want to hit on here, Tanner, a little bit, as you take a look at that from a specialty crop standpoint, that's a very much like you talked about earlier, having to pay people more to come and do those kind of things. And from the inflationary side, when you go to the produce aisle at your grocery store, whether it's sugar beets and sugar and those kind of things, when you look at those things as you move through 22, what are some of your thoughts on that specialty crop area? I mean, should we expect to see higher prices? Dramatically higher prices than what we're seeing now going into 22?
Well, on your major crops, that come out of California, there's going to be a lot of pressure there just because of the drought or the weather extremities that we've seen there. In record precipitation in October after following a record drought, and so just extreme weather does not bode well for production ag. And then tightness in labor, obviously, having to lean harder on the H-2A program. There's going to be some impacts there, I think, more directly from the weather scenario. We're going to have a smaller tree nut harvest, so almonds, pistachios, those kind of nuts walnuts, those are going to be in shorter supply. And we've had a phenomenal increase in global demand for nuts this past year. So you're going to have a significant change in pricing there for sure. Then at the same time, you have this trend driven by the drought of acres shifting out of row crops, whether that's cotton or processing tomatoes or silage or any other row crop like broccoli, what have you, moving out of those acres and moving into your permanent plantings like tree nuts that are mechanically harvested and require less labor. And so the situation there is that a lot of that produce production is going to move overseas to countries, or not necessarily overseas, but cross border. We'll say that because Mexico is not overseas technically. Places like Chile and Mexico, Peru, those kind of areas are going to be picking up a lot of that fresh produce production, and we're going to be moving into the permanent plantings like tree nuts or navel oranges, that kind of stuff. And that's going to have an impact on pricing as well, what's paid at the grocery store. And because there's also at the same time a transportation cost there, a logistics issue. When you move more and more of that produce production overseas, you got to move it a further distance to the United States. And logistics is still an issue. The cost of transportation is still an issue. Fuel costs are still elevated. So the ultimate change here then, or the change in cost, is going to be borne mostly by the consumer. And we've seen that in the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics when they produce those numbers by sector on inflation. If you look at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index on fruits, nuts, vegetables, it just goes up, 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 up. When you look at the PPI, the Producer Price Index on fruits, nuts, vegetables, it's gone down, down, down. Well, what's causing that divergence there? It's all in transportation. It's moving that product from the farm to the city, and it's got to change numerous hands. And when you have a lot of that production capacity moving abroad, it's just going to add even more cost in moving it from these further off locations like Mexico or Chile and getting it to the grocery store here in the United States. So that's, I think, part of that dynamic there. Plus, just internally here inside the United States, refrigerated trucking rates are record high. So if you want to move produce from California to New Jersey, I think the last time I looked at that, it was like $10,000 for a truck, for a refrigerated truck. And so now the economics start changing to where local produce starts to be more cost effective, starts to be more profitable. And we're starting to see more investment. Back to this kind of conversation we were having earlier, Casey, about technology, about vertical agriculture, about moving production closer to the consumer, so you don't have to pay $10,000 for a refrigerated truck to move it from California to someplace else. So that is one of those longer term impacts of this labor shortage, of high transportation costs. Those elevated dual costs are starting to change the math for these investments, where you have vertical agriculture producing things like leafy greens closer to these urban centers. And when you produce these crops using using indoor agriculture, well, it also makes sense to do it to have the technology there to make it automated as well. So it's going to be close to the consumer, highly automated, and very efficient in terms of labor and energy and water and all those other inputs. So that's one of those other longer term effects that's going to be driven by this inflationary environment.
Well, Terrence, good stuff, man. Thanks for being on the podcast. And if folks want to reach out to you and get more information about what it is you're doing there at CoBank and what kind of information you can gather from CoBank and the knowledge exchange there, what's the best way to do that?
You can always go to our website, CoBank.com. And you've got on the website, you've got all of our reports. You can download. You can also find our contact information online as well.
Right on. Good deal. Well, man, I appreciate you being on the podcast again, Tanner.
Thanks, Casey. Great to be back.
I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Make sure you check me out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. That's where you're going to find the latest editions of the Moving Iron Podcast. Also go to movingironllc.com for everything Moving Iron related. So with that, I am Casey Seymour with Tanner Ehmke. Let's go move some iron, folks. Out.
You want to have a meaningful competitive advantage to help sell more equipment. Whether you represent the sales, parts, or management department of an implement dealership, there's a surprising amount of complexity when it comes to tire, wheel, and track technology. Let Axon worry about that so you can get back to supporting your customers. Axon has leveraged years of experience to create a streamlined process that gives you a proven path to help today's grower and sell more equipment. The roots of their organization go back almost 100 years to the invention of the rubber tractor tire. Supporting agriculture is the number one driver of Axon, from product development through sales and service. To find more or become an Axon dealer, head over to axontire.com.
Moving iron in the 21st century. Hard-working people working hard for you and me. Moving iron time and time again. Through the years you'll find us here.